And then I have to hit, yeah, on the Zoom. All right, everyone. Well, we are live for our Wednesdays at 1. It is 12:59. We will give folks just a minute to hop on, and then we will get started. If you are early and you're finishing up your lunch, you'll see that we have with us today our Congressman Ben Cline. We have our Virginia Deputy Secretary of Education, Fran Bradford, and the State Director of our SBDC, Jody Keenan. And thank you guys for taking a little bit of time out of your hectic and busy schedules during all of this to brief our Lynchburg regional business community on all things business, education, labor, and workforce, which is our topic for today's webinar. So if you are new to Wednesdays at 1, these are our weekly briefings to provide you with timely information from regional, state, and federal officials amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. And as I said, today's topic is related to business implications related to education, labor, and workforce. And as a reminder, these are 45 minutes in length, and we will go through all of our speakers, and then you can type in questions using the chat feature on Zoom, and we will get to those as time allows. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to our Congressman Ben Cline. Ben, thanks for being here today. Oh, let me unmute you, Ben.
There you go.
There you
go. Glad to be with you.
Thanks for being here. So, will you give us a little bit of an update? I mean, we get what the media is reporting, but real time, what is happening with relation to everything you're working on and how that impacts the business community? And I know you guys are working on the fourth stimulus too, so please update us on that.
Right. So Congress started when this crisis first presented itself by spending over $8 trillion to, $8 billion to address the virus itself, putting forward 8.3 trillion actually to try and develop a cure and to try and get testing put out for the public to get the tests out to the public. Now that was followed by a second bill dealing with paid leave for employees and making testing available for free. And then the third bill, the CARES Act, which has been the largest one, which has successfully rolled out not only payments for individuals who have been affected by the virus, but also loan program called the PPP program, which has helped businesses, small businesses with less than 50 employees, keep their employees hired so that they can make it through this challenging time. We're working on a fourth program as well, fourth bill, and we're deliberating about how that's going to look, but we want to make sure that the PPP program continues, because by this Friday, the amount of money that we have allocated for the program is due to run out, and we've already allocated, $6 billion in loans for PPP to 26,000 applicants just in Virginia alone. And so it's been very successful here in Virginia to help small businesses. We want to keep it going. And so hopefully the fourth bill that we see in the next few weeks is going to have an influx of money for that program. You know, we've got to, everybody is doing such a great job of staying in place. We're trying to push the curve downward so that we don't overwhelm our healthcare system. And we're nearing a time when we should see a peak in the spread of the virus and it begin to decline in terms of people who are catching it, and hopefully we will begin to see a decline in the death rate as well. This is a very challenging time for families, challenging time for those, especially those with sensitive health conditions. Our offices are open, even though Congress is all the congressmen are back in their districts and women are back in their districts. We stand ready to help in our district offices. So if you go to klein.house.gov, all of my office numbers are there, and you should definitely be able to get in touch with someone in my office who can help you either access the site, make sure that you're getting your stimulus payment. The direct deposits are being made, and 80 million Americans should be seeing payments already, and more to come in terms of more Americans receiving their payments in the next few days. But we want to make sure that everybody makes it through this crisis, and we can emerge from this stronger and united as a country.
Thank you, Ben. We're going to go to Fran next, and let me go get you set up, Fran. And next we have our Virginia Deputy Secretary of Education, Fran Bradford. And Fran, will you update us on kind of all things education? You know, certainly education has been really impacted, both K-12 and on the collegiate higher ed level. Can you give us an update and maybe what might be forthcoming?
Yes, I'd be happy to. And Christy, I just want to say thank you to you and the Alliance for having me here this afternoon with this group. I want to just say good afternoon, and I bring good wishes and hopes that everybody's family and themselves are well. It's never easy following a U.S. congressman, but I've had the fortune of knowing and working with Congressman Cline since he was in the Virginia legislature. And I know he represents the area well, and really grateful for his leadership and those others in Congress who have helped to pass the CARES Act, which will actually have a big impact on higher education as we try to address some of the issues with COVID-19. I also know that higher education plays a critical role in your region, and you all have a very diverse array of institutions in the area. And I'd like to give a quick shout out to both John Capps, president of CVCC, and Meredith Wu from Sweetbriar College, both of whom I've had occasion to talk to recently about some of these issues, and know that they stand ready to be helpful in the region as we move forward. Given the audience today, I thought it would be useful to talk some about the nexus between economic development, business, and education in Virginia, and how we are looking forward on those fronts. And I'll note to that end that one of the governor's biggest goals has been to maintain our best state for business rating. That's something he was very proud of, that came back to Virginia, and he wants very much to keep that ranking. And another important goal of the state is to become the best educated state in the nation by 2030, which would mean Virginia has the highest percentage of citizens with some form of post-secondary education. And I'm a little embarrassed to admit this, but it took me a good year in this job or more to realize how closely connected those two things are. You can't be the best state for business without a great educated workforce, and you can't have a great educated workforce and educated citizenry if you don't have strong businesses in your state. And so those two things are really intricately aligned. And obviously you can't support a strong education system if the businesses and families are not paying taxes. And so without those two things working in concert from early childhood all the way through college, your state will not move forward the way it should. And I thought I'd take a quick minute to talk about sort of two really good examples that serve as that nexus between education, business, and workforce. The first is the deal that Virginia reached with Amazon. And I'll note that Virginia's proposal was much different than many other states that were bidding for this award from Amazon. Most states were simply putting in a lot of money, taxpayer resources, tax breaks and the like to try to entice Amazon to come. But Virginia really put forward a really innovative program, and that was a promise of the creation of the workforce that Amazon needed. And they needed at least a commitment of 25,000 or more computer scientists and related graduates in order to support their workforce. And so the higher education portion of that deal really just sort of spoke to the commitment of Virginia, making sure that our institutions had the resources they need to produce those graduates. And again, that was a very different proposal than any other state that tried to entice them. And what's really exciting, and one of the things that I'm most proud of having gotten to work on as it relates to the Amazon deal, is that many thought initially it would just be a few institutions that would participate. And you can probably guess on one hand who most folks thought would be included in those agreements. Virginia Tech, UVA, Mason, VCU, JMU, you can probably guess the ones that made the most sense. But at this point, every public four-year institution in Virginia, as well as the community colleges, with the exception of VMI, has an MOU to produce these graduates. And of course, VMI already does a great job of producing graduates in the engineering area, but their program is a little different, and so it didn't make sense for them at this time. But again, every other public institution said yes to this, and we have an MOU with them in place for them to start producing these graduates, and we're very excited about that. Another program that I think really shows the important nexus of education, workforce, and business is the governor's proposal on free community college. We don't have a great name for it, I'll readily admit, although the governor, he has referred to it as G3 since he was on the campaign trail. Free community college isn't also the best moniker for it, but just for your audience, because it's an easy one to understand, we'll just say free community college. But that program, which currently is on hold while we figure out the state budget, the whole purpose of that program is to produce graduates in areas that the private sector needs: healthcare, technology, the trades, early childhood, areas where we know the private sector has jobs right now. And so if we can get students into the community colleges and out in the shortest amount of time, they can walk right into jobs where they can support their family, pay taxes, and obviously then cycle back in to support the education system. So this is a program we're very, very excited about. We are hopeful that when the economy recovers, that we will get back on track to put this in place. The community college system is already doing an incredible job planning for this whenever the switch is able to go on. But that program and the Amazon deal are two really strong examples of the tie and the important tie between education, economic development, and workforce. And of course, when we talk about higher education, we are talking about all post-secondary education. And I'm reminded of an occasion when my boss, the Secretary of Education, was going through his confirmation hearing with the Virginia legislature, which I know Congressman Cline remembers those well. And he got a really good question from Delegate Collins about how in high school students often get from their guidance counselors or from others, their posters about, from the University of Richmond or JMU in the office, and sometimes the Army, but very, very infrequently are there really good encouragements for students to consider things like CTE or continuing ed. And so, when we talk about higher education, you have to talk about the full spectrum. Credential programs, CTE, continuing ed, community colleges, four-year institutions, both public and private. And so, in the administration, we think about all of those things as we are making policy and trying to address the workforce needs of regions across the state. I'll add a little bit about, and this is something that you've heard the governor talk about with some frequency, the question of equity. And we are seeing, as a result of COVID-19, issues around equity and how, when you send everybody home from an education standpoint, the strong and stark differences between localities and between even students at the same institution having the ability to participate remotely. And equity doesn't just mean you know, the color of your skin, your nationality, where you're from, but it means sort of your local region or your socioeconomic background as well. And so we have to, as we look forward to figuring out how to get education back on track in Virginia, get the economy back on track, we just have to be very thoughtful and cognizant of the fact that that means different things and will take different things to get everybody back to the same place. And then maybe not lastly, but near lastly, but also incredibly importantly, just want to say how valuable the administration feels about the tuition assistance grant program. And we were hopeful, obviously things have gone a little awry with the state budget right now, but one of the things we are looking to do is to add more funds to the tuition assistance grant program to help students across Virginia attend Virginia private colleges. And are hopeful that as the budget scenario gets itself a little bit more clear, we can continue on that path. And then lastly, just a couple of quick challenges that higher education is facing as we look towards coming on the other side of this pandemic and getting back to whatever that new normal looks like. Higher education is having to think through, like, when do they come back? What does it look like when they come back? You know, do all dorm rooms only have one student? Are all class sizes very small? You know, do you test everybody? Do you take everybody's temperature? And frankly, who is going to come back in the fall or whenever the institutions open again? There are really strong concerns about what enrollments will look like in the fall, whether everybody's going to come back, whether folks really decide they like online learning and more folks would like that modality as well. So I think ultimately, we have to just let students and families know that higher education is still here in Virginia. It will be here going forward. It is absolutely still open for business, and that higher education is going to play an incredibly important role in the economic recovery of Virginia when we all get back to what our new normal is going to look like.
Thank you, Fran, for that update. I know we're already getting some questions in the chat box, so I'll be coming back to you as well as you, Congressman Cline, so stay tuned. To finish up our speaker lineup today, we have with us Jody Keenan, and Jody is the Virginia State Director of our Small Business Development Centers across the state, and she does have a PowerPoint, so I'm going to get that loaded and share that with everyone. And then we will turn it over to Jody. So Jody, I am turning it over to you, and you are off mute.
Okay, thanks, Christine, and thank you for the invitation to join this panel and to speak with businesses in the Lynchburg region. I'm Jody Keenan. I'm the State Director, as Christine said, of the Small Business Development Center. I'm based at George Mason, but we have 27 offices across the Commonwealth, including an office that is co-hosted by the Lynchburg Regional Business Alliance. And Stephanie is our Executive Director, and there's her name and her website address. So I encourage you to reach out to Stephanie and her team for assistance as you are navigating these challenging times as a result of COVID-19. Christine, if you go back to the first slide, this is the last slide. So if you'll pop to the first slide, we can get started. Thank you.
I'm gonna do my best. There we go.
There we go. Okay. So I can cover today just a quick overview and update on the two most prominent disaster financing programs that are in operation now. The first is the EIDL loan, and the second is the Paycheck Protection Program, or the PPP. And then I've already briefly introduced you to the local SBDC resource. So next slide, please. This chart it just gives you, I know it's a lot of visual there, it gives you a comparison though of the three programs. So you have a sense of what your options might be and help you kind of discern which one you want to apply for, or if you want to apply for all of them, which you certainly can do. I'll give you some high-level overview. And there's a website link there as well to the SBA where you can get the detail in the application forms themselves. The EIDL loan and the advance economic injury disaster loan, those two offerings are provided directly from the Small Business Administration. So you'll go to the SBA website, complete the application, they will review it, and they will disperse the funds through Treasury directly to your account if you're approved. These loans are up to $2 million. They're available for small businesses with fewer than 500 employees, as well as 501c3s and faith-based organizations. The intent of these funds is to help cover expenses that would have been paid had the disaster not occurred: rent, payroll, utilities, interest on debt, and the like. There is no collateral requirement for loans up to $25,000, no personal guarantee for loans up to $200,000. And you don't need to demonstrate or have access to credit in another form or from another source in order to be eligible. One of the features of the EIDL loan, and probably the most familiar, is this advance, the EIDL advance. As you apply for the EIDL loan, you then can, the last question is you can indicate that you'd like an advance on this loan. And the advance is up to $10,000. I'll talk a little bit more about the nuance of that term in a moment. But so you apply for the EIDL, and then as you're concluding, you indicate that you'd like the advance. The advance is a grant. It's not to be repaid. You can use it in addition to the larger EIDL loan. You can use it in addition to getting a PPP. You just can't use any of these programs for the same expenses. So you're not able to double dip if you want to use that term. The other program, as the larger program, is the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program. This loan, you go directly to a bank for this financing. SBA approved lenders are managing this program. You can apply for up to 2.5 times your average monthly payroll costs. The maximum loan amount is $10 million. Again, this is for small businesses with less than 500 employees, also nonprofits, 501c3 nonprofits, and faith-based organizations. The intent of PPP is to keep people getting a paycheck. So the funds are to be used to cover payroll and some other specific expenses like interest on mortgage, rent, and utilities. But 75% of the loan should be used for those payroll expenses. The compelling feature of the PPP is that it is a forgivable loan, meaning you don't have to repay it back if you meet certain criteria. And those criteria are: you need to keep salaries at employee levels and compensation levels consistent for an 8-week period after you get your financing. And 75% of that loan that you get needs to be paid or used to cover payroll expenses. When you meet those criteria, 100% of the loan is eligible to be forgiven. Any portion of the loan that is not forgiven is repayable over 2 years with a 1% interest rate. Okay, next slide, please. I mentioned that there were some nuances to the EIDL loan and the EIDL advance.
I'm trying to be. There you go.
Okay. The EIDL advance, you're eligible for up to $10,000. Recent guidance from SBA has further defined this as up to $1,000 or $1,000 per employee, up to $10,000. So not every business will be eligible for the full $10,000. And the per employee is head count. A part-time employee counts as the same as a full-time employee. So for every employee up to 10, you'll get $1,000 per employee. The second nuance related to EIDL is on the loan side, where you can borrow the maximum loan amount is $2 million. However, there has been such an overwhelming demand for this program and SBA is interested in providing as support to as many businesses as possible. That they have recently modified this, that businesses will receive up to $15,000 or 2 months of working capital. We're waiting for some additional clarification. In other words, if you're approved for the 2 million and you only get the 15,000, when does the remainder come? Those are details that are not, we're not privy to those details yet, but we certainly will keep you posted, and so will SBA as those details come along. Some of this is also related to the amount of funds that have been invested in the EIDL loan program. And so as Congress is moving forward on additional stimulus funding, we're optimistic that these tills will be filled up even more. The PPP loan program, as Congressman Cline mentioned, some results that came out yesterday, you'll see that there have been over 1 million loans in the US have been approved. It's about $247 billion of funds that have been approved. The total amount of funds available for this PPP program is $350 billion. So you can see the level of demand. This program opened up 10 days ago, 12 days ago now, April 3rd. In Virginia, there have been 26,000, almost 27,000 loans approved and $6.6 billion. So there's been a lot of great activity in Virginia. The next slide, please. These are the SBA lenders in the Lynchburg region. As I mentioned, the PPP program is issued by or managed by 7A SBA lenders. And these are the banks in your region that are participating. Every bank has their own criteria as to who is eligible to apply. There are a few lenders who are accepting non-customers, but the rule of thumb is you really should first start talking with the bank that you already have a banking relationship with, and talk with that lending institution about participating in the PPP. If they're not a 7A lender, then you should talk to any of these other banks, but there are some who are actually have already opened up to non-banking clients. So thank you for that. And then the final slide is, again, to Stephanie Keener's website, sbdclynchburgregion.org. Stephanie and her team are working 7 days a week, honestly, trying to help businesses navigate their way through these financial programs, and also helping businesses get ready to relaunch, restart, or maybe reorganize business models so that you can take advantage of as the economy returns to normal. So thank you again for your time. And if you've got questions, I'm sure we'll be happy to answer them.
Yeah, well, let me get us back to green, and we'll start. We've got quite a few questions. Congressman Cline, I've got a couple for you.
Okay.
Let's see. What are the key elements that you think should be considered when executing the economic recovery? What do you think we can do as a region? Well,
the main goal of the $2 trillion CARES Act was to insert liquidity into the economy to make sure that businesses and families and individuals could get through the next several months. And so making sure that in the Lynchburg area, it's the same dynamic. You know, as we move through the next several months and keep with the social distancing that's necessary, helping small businesses stay afloat, whether it's by ordering out at the local restaurants or buying gift cards that you'll redeem at Christmas time. There are so many local businesses that really need our help, and the Lynchburg area is no exception. So, you know, we are here to help those small businesses, as Jody was just outlining, whether it's through the PPP or the EIDL, both of which are running up against limits that Congress needs to address. There's also going to be a new program through the Treasury Department coming out soon. It's going to be called the Main Street Business Lending Program, and that is going to be available to businesses who want to take out loans between 1 million and several more millions of dollars, a minimum of $1 million loan. If a business wants to take advantage of that, they can contact our office. Hopefully those regs are going to be rolled out here in the next week or two. But we do need to inject more money into the PPP program to maintain that liquidity so that businesses can adjust to the challenges that are happening and continue to survive over the next several months and keep those Lynchburg residents employed, because we need to make sure that this is an unprecedented time where we have a global economy that is all being impacted at the same time, and we've never seen anything like it. So the more we can get through it together, the better off our businesses here locally will be.
Okay. I got one more question for you, Ben, and then Fran and Jody, get ready. So another question for you, Congressman Cline. Last week, Smithfield Foods warned of food shortages, especially as it relates to our meat supply. And the quote is, "The U.S. is perilously close to the edge in terms of our meat supply." The nation's livestock farmers are worried. What is Congress considering to ensure the U.S. is going to be able to produce food or not?
Well, just like any other business, you have to make sure that the workers are able to operate in a safe environment. And so what we found was in that Smithfield facility in South Dakota, you had an outbreak of coronavirus in that facility, and it had to shut down. The businesses, the food industry can operate safely if it follows proper safety measures. And so we're not to the point where our food is at risk, our meat supply is at risk, but we do have to take proper precautions to make sure that those types of outbreaks don't happen all across the country and all throughout the different aspects of our food supply, whether it's poultry or dairy or meat, beef, pork. We have to make sure that those operations are done in a safe manner.
Okay, thank you. I am going to Fran next, and let's see. Fran, the question, can you talk about the status of the CARES Act funding that's coming from Congress to the institutions in Virginia?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I compliment our friends north of here who saw wisely to include funding for higher education in the CARES Act. At the highest level, there are really three pots of funds that will go to support higher education from the CARES Act. The first two pots come out of a larger pot of about $300 million or so for higher education, split roughly in half. So roughly about $150 million of that 300 is earmarked specifically for students to address COVID-related expenses and not to reimburse institutions for refunds that they may have given. Those funds are now available. Institutions are applying for those funds right now. Public and private, large and small institutions do have access to those funds. And once an institution gets the funds, then they must distribute them based upon some guidance directly to the students. So that $150 million pot is already in play, and again, directed directly to the students. The other $150 million pot will go to the institutions themselves, and there is a bit more flexibility about how they spend those funds. And we will get more guidance on that pot of money, we believe, around April 23rd. And then lastly, the other major pot of funds for higher education is a $66 million pot of discretionary money that will go to the governor. Now that pot is split between K-12 and higher education. No decision has been made yet on how those funds will be split. We just got acknowledgement of that pot of funds and the instructions yesterday. So we are still working through that. But that pot is relatively flexible in terms of how the governor consider spending those funds. And I will note that the funds that go directly to the students, that $150 million pot, those are not factored into the calculations are students who were online. They were factored in students who were on campus.
Okay, good distinction. Thanks for clarifying that, Fran. One more question for you, Fran. Then I've got a couple for Jody and one more for Ben if we have time to come back. So. Let's see, your next question. Fran, from your perspective, since there's been this massive evolution into online education, how is that, from your perspective, how is that going? And you mentioned briefly, you know, colleges are now scratching their head, wondering what long-term implications that have for our colleges in Virginia. Any insight into kind of some of those conversations on the statewide level and when you're convening with institutions of higher learning?
Sure. No, thank you for that question. A couple of things. One, I think it's worth noting that every institution did manage to make that transition. And for those of you who know higher education well, it is not always easy for them to turn quickly on a dime, but will completely complement the higher education sector across the board for their ability to do that and make that work. Were there some hiccups? Absolutely. But the entire sector was able to make that adjustment from small private college to large research public university. And they've all done that in a little bit different ways. And you know, it required changes, not just for the faculty delivering the content, but for students who were getting that content in a new way. And so, yes, as we look down the road to what this may mean for how higher education functions in the future, I think we're going to have to be more thoughtful about how we support their technology needs. Should there be more consistency in the use of technology across the sector? How do you train faculty to utilize this technology? And also for folks to realize that even though it may be counterintuitive, online education is, generally speaking, not less expensive than in person. The costs are different, the training is different, but it is not necessarily a less expensive way of doing things. And so it's going to take a fairly strong paradigm shift if this were to become sort of the norm, which I think, higher education is not going to all be delivered online in the future, but I think there is going to be more of it, and it is going to get better. The last thing I will add, one of the things that I applaud our institutions, particularly our community colleges, for doing, when everybody went home after spring break to get education remotely, there are a lot of students for whom home means no access to technology, no access to broadband. And so for some students, if they were on a 4-year campus, they could stay and they could get access that way. On a community college campus, you don't have dorms and you don't have folks readily on campus. And so what the higher ed centers and the community colleges did is they actually beefed up their Wi-Fi signal so that folks could come and actually, park in the parking lot and do their coursework and their programming in the parking lot, because they had the technology there. They could access the internet that way. So I broadly applaud higher education for how it made a really tough transition and really quickly. And I would say the absolute same about the K-12 system in Virginia. They literally changed their way of functioning overnight and did so in a way that I think helped as many kids as possible under the circumstance.
Thank you, Fran. We're getting a couple questions, Jody. These are mostly, I would think, directed to you. A couple questions about the disbursements and the lag in disbursements or lag in decisions, not hearing back regarding EIDL and PPP. Can you give any insight as to what folks can expect in terms of hearing back and disbursements of funds even?
So there's really two channels of communication. So if you're not sure where you stand with your EIDL application, that's a communicate that you need to contact SBA. They do have an email address and they do have phone numbers, and I appreciate that folks are waiting for hours on the phone. Some of it is depending, I think, on when you submitted your EIDL application. So I would encourage you to, if you haven't heard anything at all, to reach out to the SBDC. You may need to reapply for the EIDL, quite honestly, because they had some system crashes, they had some retooling of applications, and depending on when you submitted, you may have gotten, unfortunately, lost in that shuffle. On the PPP side, and well, let me back up. The other piece on EIDL is that they were initially hoping to be able to deploy the advance within 3 days of review. That clearly has not happened. So I think you need to manage expectations as far as when you expect those dollars to be released. But we have heard of companies and businesses who have gotten the advance and also gotten the loans. On the PPP side, because that is done by the banks, you really need to be in touch with your lender. It's a multi-step process. You apply through the lender does an internal review and approval, and then they submit that to SBA. And then they get a loan number, if you will. And once you get a loan number, then they can complete the approval process and the closing documents. So again, we do know that companies have gotten the PPP loans as well. It is definitely lender by lender specific, depending on what their internal process is and their connection up to SBA. So
this is sort of related, and I don't know whether Ben or Jody, you guys want to take this question, but there's been some questions as to banks that have said they're turning away folks because they've reached their limit. And there's some confusion around, well, what limit? The federal government has put all this money into PPP, and it really comes down to liquidity. So can you explain that a little bit for the businesses in the region that might not understand what that federal backing really looks like?
Sure. The federal government put a specific dollar amount into PPP. The CARES Act was a $2 trillion bill, several $100 billion put into PPP, but the demand was so high, and it did have to be administered through the banks. But some banks, some limits were placed on some banks. Wells Fargo was an example because they had other issues, and so they were not allowed to distribute as much. But the hundreds of billions of dollars that were allocated to PPP have been distributed for the most part, or will have been distributed by Friday. And so banks are starting to inform applicants that they are not going to be approving loans to a certain amount. I joined several of my colleagues on a letter to SBA just in the last week, asking them about delays in notification and problems they were having with constituents finding out about status of EIDL or PPP applications and how we were going to go about addressing that for the next round. We do need to see some changes at the SBA because EIDL was not built for this level of activity, and we just don't have EIDL was that program wasn't ready for the volume that it got. So that's why Treasury is rolling out this new Main Street program. You're going to see additional opportunities and hopefully more money for PPP. Just ask that folks stay tuned and either look on the SBA website or check our website for details. But we are going to help small businesses all the way through this.
Yeah. One final question, Congressman Cline, and then we will be out of time. This question actually came on our Facebook feed. Any considerations for self-employed folks with this next round of funding?
Absolutely. My understanding is that self-employed individuals were able to access certain pots of money, but that undoubtedly in this gig economy, we are going to have to make sure that self-employed individuals can access whatever loan programs we make available. So as the fourth bill is deliberated and debated in Congress, you know, it was $8 billion for towards a cure and a vaccine, $2 trillion for the CARES Act, and hopefully we'll see another large investment in PPP that will cover self-employed individuals moving forward.
That's some good news, Congressman Cline. Thank you for that. Well, as promised, we are keeping these webinars to 45 minutes, and I think we got through most of the questions. So thank you all for your time today. I would remind everyone, there's some questions about Jody's PowerPoint, and we will get that on the Facebook feed as soon as we're done. We'll make sure that that gets uploaded so you all have that. Upcoming webinars, tomorrow the SBDC locally has their Smart Start class to help you get your business up and running. And now's a great time. If you've been furloughed or laid off and you've had that business idea, maybe now's the time. So attend that webinar. Next week, we'll be back with Wednesdays at 1. We're finalizing the content for that as we speak. Next Thursday, we have lessons with leaders amidst the COVID pandemic, and we have Jeff Kirshner with the Academy that will be on doing Q&A for that. And the following week, we will have our virtual pancakes and politics. So get your own pancakes, but we're going to feature our local legislators that represent our region, recapping our General Assembly session. And that will be, I believe, that's the 22nd. So look, we're all pivoting during this time, and I applaud our resiliency of our business community and our leaders, both locally, nationally, and regionally, for all that you're doing to look, make lemonade out of lemons, and we're going to make this happen. And so appreciate your time today, and for all of you all out there that are surviving and figuring out the new normal, keep doing what you're doing and continue to feed us content or questions, and we'll be sure to line up relevant speakers to help you through this time. So without further ado, stay well, stay healthy, stay away from people, and we'll see you soon online. So thank you all and have a blessed day.
Thank y'all.
Thank you, guys.